Welcome to Big Business This Week. I'm Justine Miller here on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. News coming out of the entertainment industry is not slowing down, with major settlements, mergers, splits, and the biggest awards show of the year just days away. To help break it all down for us, we have Seth Schackner here, managing director at Strat Americas, and he also has a new podcast, Breaking Down the Biz. Thank you so much for being here with us, Seth. We really appreciate it.
Great to be here, Justine.
Yeah, so happy to talk through really so many things that are happening here. So first, let's start with the Live Nation Department of Justice settlement. So this case was first filed almost 2 years ago and now has finally just settled, but maybe not how some people would have hoped or would have thought. So tell us a little bit more about that settlement and what you're saying is a little bit more behavioral and less structural.
Yeah, sure. This has been kicking around for, more than 2 years, since I think everyone in the country and around the world, heard about the big Taylor Swift ticketing Eras Tour meltdown, which caused a lot of, concerns. It was extremely difficult to get tickets. And I think a lot of parties, particularly consumers, but also, our representatives in government, were really looking for something to punch, something to kind of hit and kind of work with. And, there's been a longstanding concern around the combination of a ticketing service, Ticketmaster, with Live Nation, which is the country's largest concert promoter. And there has been a very big effort to try and break the two up. Politicians, people, Swifties, everyone under the sun saying we got to get rid of this thing and break the two apart. And the lawsuit that occurred between the Justice Department started in the Biden administration, by the way, and Live Nation's been kicking around for a couple of years, but it just settled, and I think it's settled in a way that for some of us, those of us who probably know how the business works, and that's where my biggest concerns were, to kind of not mess with the chemistry of the business, I think see it as a serious and meaningful settlement that doesn't completely tear apart the structure of the business. I think there are a lot of people that thought, oh my God, we didn't get our tickets. We got to break these two things up and punish things. But it's going to put a lot of behavioral remedies on Live Nation. And, it's got a lighter touch. It actually will open up some of the exclusivities around ticketers and venues. It's going to force Live Nation to sell off some smaller market venues. And for me, actually, most importantly, along with consumers, it's going to give artists, music artists and performers, some safeguards and some protections so that they're not feeling kind of railroaded into working with any one solution. So I think it's a positive thing on many levels.
Yeah, and why do you think that the settlement was put together in this way? As you mentioned, some people thought that maybe it would get completely broken up or other things would happen. Maybe it would have a larger fine to pay. So why do you think that they structured it this way?
Well, look, I'd like to think that, the Department of Justice and Live Nation kind of looked at the situation realistically and probably tried to come to terms to something without some sort of protracted, court issue. The initial question was whether Live Nation behaved like a monopolist. And actually, the trial narrowed that away. It got rid of it. What was settled didn't have to do with that. This just looked at some of behavioral issues around ticketing and forcing artists into venues. So I think it was kind of a pragmatic way to solve it. There's probably some political timing to it as well. The chief antitrust person at the DOJ recently left before this, and there's probably a different climate now towards, opposing mergers than there was in the last administration. But I think it's a very realistic settlement. I think there are big problems in other parts of the ticketing universe that this does not address, but I'm kind of happy with this settlement, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and when you look at those original accusations about the monopoly and some of the other issues that were originally brought up with ticket prices and alleged bad ticketing practices, all of that, do you feel like this settlement does remedy those issues and actually drive down tickets for customers in the future?
Probably not, to be honest with you, but I think the real thing is that ticket prices aren't set by Live Nation or by Ticketmaster. Our artists actually set them. And you don't, the silence from a lot of artists is really deafening around this settlement, by the way. You don't hear Taylor Swift or Springsteen's people coming out and cheering it on, basically. But, it's kind of a different question, basically, because the streaming landscape has really hurt artists. They don't make anything from it. So this is obviously an opportunistic place where anyone who's performing can make money. So I don't know, if you can realistically expect ticket prices to come down, but I think some of those fees fees around venues are going to be capped. And I think if there are venues that want to use different ticketing services, maybe they're cheaper, they'll have the ability to do that. I think what I'm most encouraged about actually isn't in this settlement, but it's something that the FTC is pursuing that's going to crack down on all kinds of problems in the secondary market. And if that's done successfully, that will actually help everyone.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that FTC situation because I think that one has to do more with bots, right? That has to do more with scalpers. So tell us a little bit how that one kind of fits in here.
This is the biggest problem in the market. It's not sitting between the ticketing service and Live Nation. It's people can basically go out and I could offer you a Springsteen ticket for sale for his next tour and not actually have it. That's called speculative ticket of selling, and that's ridiculous. And that's actually happening right now. And with the Eras tour and with other big ones, Oasis, Beyonce, Metallica, when big bands go on sale, these bot farms can assault the pre-sales with, and I think in Taylor's case, there was billions of these requests. So there's a bots act that's about 8 or 9 years old in this country. You got to crack down on this and get rid of these bot farms. And then there's also been like just classic old school scalpers who use fake accounts who buy up tickets immediately to go out on the pre-sale market and offer these things for outrageous prices. So this area is the biggest one that's got to get fixed. And I think if that gets fixed, if you will, and I can't give you on this specific conference call a detailed recommendation for it, but to the extent that it's managed in a way that prices aren't completely outrageous and you get rid of some of these scalpers and bots, that's going to really change it more than anything I'm seeing here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that is such a big part of what's going on these days with all of these concert sales and tickets and everything. So that definitely makes sense. When you go back to Live Nation, how do you think they as a company are looking at the settlement here? Do you think they feel like it's more of a slap on the wrist and they kind of got away with something, not too bad here? Or do you think that it'll actually have any true bearing on how they do business moving forward?
It's probably a little bit of both of those things. I mean, I wouldn't call it a slap on the wrist. I mean, the penalty fee they paid is a real tiny fee in comparison to what their overall um business is. It's tiny compared to their revenue mix. And I would add that they've been doing better and better, even with all this stuff that's going on, the consumer concerns and the backlash. But they avoided a breakup basically, which was probably the biggest fear. And that's what I did not want to see either, because I think there's a reason why that industry exists and why Live Nation is there. They actually support a lot of interests, venues, artists, promoters, and they're kind of a punching bag, if you will. And if you took that structure apart, it could cause a lot more harm. And I think the remedy here, it's got a lighter touch. It doesn't really force anything on anyone. It opens up some of the exclusivity. So I think they're probably thinking this is a rather positive thing. I know they had a lot of lobbyists in Capitol Hill trying to work on this for sure, as do others. But so probably happy about it.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you about that. If the DOJ would have ruled that they had to break apart, what kind of negative outcomes do you think could have come from that, other than just for Live Nation themselves having to break apart? But what would that have
Yeah.
done to the industry and for consumers?
I didn't like that solution at all because I think that would have, you know, ripple effects throughout the live entertainment ecosystem. I mean, first and foremost, if you sort of force venues to have smaller ticketers in place, it's the classic, you need a bigger boat analogy from the movie Jaws. I mean, if a Taylor Swift comes down the road or the next Oasis tour, whatever it's going to be, and you have a ticketer that can't handle that, it's going to be worse. So you could wind up causing a lot more problems than you think. But I also think for artists, there's a reason why promoters exist as well. Because I work with a bunch of artists. I actually manage several, and all of our artists, even the biggest, are typically small enterprises. They're not big corporate entities with giant staffs. So they need things like a promoter to rent a venue, to arrange for the parking and the popcorn and the insurance, all the operational stuff that people don't think about when they're talking about this. And I wouldn't have liked to see any of that harmed, actually, at least have those choices taken away from them. So I think we kind of avoided that here. And I think it's a lighter touch. No, it's probably not the breakup that people were asking about, and it is a very small fee, but for me, it's a positive set of circumstances.
That's great. And so when you think kind of moving forward with this, do you have an optimistic outlook, not only for Live Nation and the ticketing industry, but also for consumers and artists?
Um, well, I mean, I think it's kind of status quo until they fix the secondary market. I mean, there's a bunch of states that are going to oppose this, and there's always the chance of some kind of appeal as well. So, unfortunately, it's probably not totally over right now. I think there could be some individual circumstances in states where we still have some of these problems. But I think if the FTC action, goes forward, and I haven't heard a ton about it because obviously been other things in the news that are maybe more important than this one. But I think if that is resolved, that's something that would give me a lot of hope and a lot of optimism, actually.
Yeah, that's great to think about all of that actually getting resolved in this whole saga here. Now, turning to another ongoing situation in the entertainment world, let's talk about this Paramount Warner Discovery merger that has been going on for what feels like a very long time, with so much
Mm.
back and forth. What is the latest, and where does this all stand right now?
This is a really tough one. I mean, the latest is that, the bid to merge Paramount and for Paramount's purchase of Warner has been accepted. So I think there's a formal voting process that will be going underway. But, Netflix pulled out of the bidding for Warner Brothers Discovery, and it looks like Paramount's got it. I think there'll have to be a formal approval process for it, but there's for sure regulatory concerns, both in the US and also here. Some states like California have vowed to look at this thing, and I think the Europeans will be tough on it as well. So it's not over till it's over, and it could be 6 to as many as 18 months for the entire entity to be approved. But for those of us in Hollywood, firstly, it's been a real roller coaster, if you will. I think there's a lot of deep fear and concern because what you're getting here, kind of this Noah's Ark problem, if you will, where you're putting two, not identical, but pretty similar entities together, and you've got two of everything, two production departments, probably two, human resources departments, two finance departments, the whole bit. And so I think Ellison and Paramount have put something at 6 to 7 billion in cost savings in their business plan, when it came to combining these two entities. And that can mean a lot of things, but I think it's going to be very troubling for workers and people that are working in these staff. I'd be concerned about losing people in the transition for sure. So that's a real concern. And I think what they spend on in terms of production cost, how many movies you can expect to see, Ellison and his team have put out a number and have pledged to respect theatrical releasing as well. But I think over time you could probably expect to see that number kind of tweak down. But the biggest thing that I'm seeing here is there's almost 80 billion of debt on this enterprise. And that's a brutal thing that will probably take over a lot of the corporate strategy, how you reduce that debt. So um, this is an extremely tough one, because I think we were looking at how you transform a studio going forward. And a lot of us had come around, I'll speak for myself, to seeing Netflix as maybe a more ambitious, innovative way, different enterprises to combine and keep our studio systems, vibrant for the future. Um, this is more of a combination of two different studios. So it's going to be a hard one.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's so many different factors at play here. You've mentioned so many of them, and really so many different things that we're trying to see how this will all play out. So, how do you think this will actually affect the people in Hollywood when it comes to those cuts? You mentioned that $7 billion. When it comes to cuts, when it comes to creative talent, what do you think is going to happen there?
Well, you hope that it doesn't affect the ecosystem, just like the prior discussion, at least in my view, because we have a really vibrant ecosystem here where, I'll state the obvious for those who work us. Directors, actors, technical staff, production staff are typically not employees of a studio. They work as freelancers, as contractors basically, and they're represented in some cases by agents, and they usually tend to freely move about from project to project. And so you're going to have a situation here where there's one less buyer for all that creativity and talent, any way you look at it. So that's very tough. I think the hope is that the creative teams are kind of kept intact. Um, Particularly, let's talk about HBO, which has got everything from The Sopranos to Game of Thrones, and the folks that run that probably will have new reporting relationships. And I think there's been publicly Ellison has said he's going to combine HBO Max with Paramount Plus, and so you know you I look at it. My concern is that the creative chemistry isn't affected basically, and we don't see any of this corporate stuff that's going on reflected in the programming and the products. But I think there's a ton of people out there that think they'll lose work, whether it's contracted work or other types of work.
Yeah, and that's especially relevant when we think about that massive debt figure you put out there. $80 billion is a lot of debt. What do you think these implications will be when it comes to, again, the people who are working there and also the output that happens?
Well, usually if two identical halves are merging, I've been through this myself. I survived 3 or 4 mergers at Sony, BMG, and have been through a lot of it in other areas, AOL, Time Warner as well. Usually departments get melded together, and some stay and some go, and there's usually dust clouds, organizationally when these things happen, and the dust get kicked up, and you can have big distractions. So yeah, I would definitely expect there to be layoffs and staff reductions, and over time. Um, if if the new enterprise kind of has this huge debt reduction, as well as cost savings kind of in its business plans, you're going to expect cuts. So I would expect more selective cuts on motion pictures and TV and filmmaking in terms of the programming that's put out there. It's hard to say now, but it's hard not to look at this and see it as totally expansive. There used to be a word called synergies that was kicked around a lot when these mergers happened, and for the most part, those are never realistic when the operations are put together. And the history of mergers in this city, I mean, Fox going into Disney is probably the nearest parallel. MGM was once an independent studio, is now part of Amazon. I think those are pretty illustrative, actually, of what this could look like after maybe 2 to 3 years after.
Yeah, that synergy buzzword is definitely thrown around a lot, but we'll see what actually happens with all of this. You mentioned also some of the regulatory clearances that there are to think about here. Tell us a little bit more about that, and then also about people and states, other places around the world pushing back against this deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll certainly look at streaming market share, and what if any dominant factors, even along the lines of what we talked about in terms of monopolistic practices. I mean, this thing has, if you, depending upon how you define the streaming market, I don't necessarily think it's going to be viewed as a monopolistic entity. So it's probably less of a factor. But I think the fact, I think there's a word called monopsony when you lose a buyer, basically, of talent, and I think that could be a factor that not just states, but any regulators are looking at as well. Um, the Europeans also look at pricing. If you look at the EU and privacy issues as well, and some of the territories there, France will have local content restrictions or considerations. So, hey, you can't just come in here with all American content. You got to use some of our directors as well. So I would bet all those things will be brought to the fore. I don't think the regulatory clearance is just about the US domestic side, which is what was billed as Paramount's advantage. They have a close relationship with the current administration. Having worked with CBS and some of the stuff that's happened over the past year. So I don't think it's a given, but I also think that there'll be some pretty serious consideration when the thing is merged. What I've seen before in my experience actually in music is sometimes the regulators will pull out certain assets and say, "Hey, you can't have two news entities. You got to give this to a competitor." I've actually seen that with big artists in music or label groups. I don't know if it'll happen here, but I don't think regulatory approval is a complete given.
Got it. And when we think about some of these other studios and other media companies that we've talked about right now, some other deals that are happening, Netflix just announced that they're splitting with Meghan Markle's lifestyle brand after only a 1 year partnership. How do you see this, as well as all these other mergers in the industry, in the context of the Paramount deal?
That's a great question. Well, I think Netflix, like hopefully, like all of these other studios, are getting smarter and smarter about where they spend their money, right? And I think the strategy's been about making these things profitable the last couple of years, not just about racing for subscribers. You know, um, Warner Discovery's head David Zaslav, who's excited a lot of people with this merger, some of the deal terms coming out of it. I think he was actually um, pretty savvy about what to roll through theaters, what to pick up for streaming, and where to spend. And a lot of people were probably unhappy about some of the cuts, but I think that type of approach is what you can see going forward. I bet you'll see it in the new Paramount merged entity as well. There's a ton of stuff with legacy pay TV, because the new entity is going to have a lot of networks, and they're pledging to keep them, and that'll be an interesting thing for me to see because I think Disney has done that pretty successfully with their own pay TV networks. So there are parts of his strategy, over at Paramount that I think are quite smart. Also, just in terms of the tech strategy, cloud based. putting everything on a single cloud. And I also think Netflix did a very, mature and responsible thing by saying, look, this is getting way too expensive for us. Their stock price was going down. So I think that type of sophisticated, decision making, I think in terms of programming is what you're going to see going forward. It's smart.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about all of that as we move forward. And speaking of the entertainment biz and Hollywood moving forward, the 98th Annual Academy Awards are happening this Sunday. I am very excited. I've seen almost all the movies for Best Picture. They're nominated, hosting an Oscars watch party. So I'm excited. Tell us, what do you think is going to be the big winner? Who do you think is going to be taking home all those top awards?
I'm totally happy that people are even thinking about it still, because sometimes people are not paying attention, particularly the younger people. But yeah, I think it's going to be a kind of a battle between one battle after another in Sinners. Although there were some, great pictures from abroad. I'm a big Sinners fan. I think it was an awesome movie, an American picture, a Warner Brothers picture, by the way. So I'm probably looking for that maybe as Best Picture, and hoping Michael B. Jordan picks up best Oscar as well. And I think Kate Hudson is my favorite choice for Best Actress. But Paul Thomas Anderson, I think, hopefully will get director on this one as well, and hopefully people will pay attention. It'll be a fun show. Conan O'Brien's hosting it, so it should be a blast.
Yeah, it should be great. Very exciting to see what happens and who takes home all those awards. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Great to be here, Justine. And by the way, I'm launching a podcast in a week called Breaking Down the Biz. I hope everyone gets a chance to listen to it on all outlets. We're very excited about it.
That's so exciting. We'll definitely have to check that out. Thank you so much again for being here, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.